Have you ever been judged before you even spoke a word? Imagine standing at the gate of a plane, holding a valid first-class ticket, yet being told subtly, silently, that you don't belong there. That's what happened to Christopher Hale, a calm but powerful black CEO. When 12 minutes of suspicion unfolded into a storm that would shake an entire airline. 12 minutes where every glance, every pause, every demand for proof wasn't about rules. It was about dignity. And in those 12 minutes, Christopher had a choice: accept humiliation, or stand up not with anger, but with unshakable calm. What would you have done? Would you stay quiet, or risk everything to show the world that respect is not a privilege, but a right? This isn't just his story, it's a mirror, because at some point in our lives, each of us has been made to feel small, questioned, or unseen. Stay with us and ask yourself, what if it were you? If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, so more people can journey with us into the fight for dignity. The hum of Liberty International Airport was a familiar soundscape of rolling suitcases, scattered announcements, and impatient footsteps. At Gate C-17, the boarding line for Flight 382 to New York was moving at its usual rhythm until it slowed at the sight of a tall, composed black man in a tailored Navy suit. Christopher Hale, 48 years old, stood at the front of the first-class queue, phone in one hand, leather briefcase in the other. The platinum insignia on the case glinted under the fluorescent lights. He was calm, even serene, the way someone becomes after years of learning to master both boardrooms and storms. But his calm would soon be tested. The gate agent, Michael Turner, froze as Christopher handed over his phone for scanning. Michael's voice carried a hesitation the passengers in line quickly picked up. Sir? Michael said, brows knitting. Are you sure you're in the right line? This is first-class boarding. A hush fell behind Christopher. A middle-aged woman shifted in her heels. A young man with earbuds glanced up, sensing tension. Christopher's lips curved into the faintest smile. Yes, he replied softly. I'm in the right place. Michael forced a laugh that rang hollow. He scanned the code, and the machine beeped green. Still, his body language didn't budge. Sometimes these phones, they glitch, Michael muttered. Do you maybe have another form of confirmation? From the corner of his eye, Christopher noticed the way people were watching him, not with curiosity, but with suspicion. He'd seen it too many times. He remembered his father's words when he was 12. Son, some doors will open slow for you, not because of who you are inside, but because of what they see outside. Don't let that stop you from walking through. Keeping his voice even, Christopher said. The code is valid. Would you like to see my ID? Michael hesitated, then nodded. The line had stopped moving entirely now, a dozen passengers growing restless. One man sighed loudly. Come on, some of us have connections to make. Christopher opened his wallet and handed over his driver's license, along with a heavy metal card that caught Michael's eye. The American Express Centurion, black and weighty, glistened under the light. Michael studied them a little too long, as if searching for flaws that weren't there. Behind him, a little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve. Why won't they let him through? She whispered. Her mother hushed her quickly, but her eyes stayed fixed on the scene. Finally, Michael handed back the cards, cheeks coloring. Everything seems fine, he said reluctantly. Just routine. But the damage had been done. The whispers were already spreading through the line. What's going on? Did he fake a ticket? Is there a problem? Christopher collected his things with steady hands. Inside, however, there was a sharpness, the old ache that came from being doubted for no reason at all. He thought of the countless flights he had taken as a business traveler, the lounges, the conference rooms, the long nights over contracts. Yet here he was again, standing still while others judged his right to sit in a seat he had purchased. He stepped forward, past the gate. The carpet muffled his shoes, but the weight in his chest was louder than any sound around him. The first-class cabin gleamed with leather seats and polished accents. A flight attendant, Rachel Collins, looked up as he entered. For a moment her eyes flicked over his suit, his briefcase, his face. Then her jaw tightened. Christopher nodded politely. "Good morning." Her return smile was thin, professional in form, but absent in spirit. "Good morning, sir. May I see your boarding pass again?" Christopher paused. He had just shown it at the gate, but years of discipline kept his tone neutral. He handed it over. Rachel inspected it as though she were reviewing a counterfeit bill. She passed it to the lead flight attendant, David Miller, who had appeared beside her. David frowned. "We'll just need to verify a few things." Christopher felt his jaw tighten, but his voice remained level. "Of course, though I do believe you'll find everything in order." Behind him, other passengers were entering the cabin. A white man in a golf jacket breezed past without being stopped. Rachel smiled warmly at him, barely glancing at his ticket. He sat down, pulled out his phone, and never looked back. Christopher inhaled slowly, deeply. The words formed in his mind, though he didn't speak them yet. This is the same story, written over and over. Different faces, same suspicion. Today, I can choose whether the ending changes. He moved toward seat 2A, placed his briefcase carefully in the overhead bin, and sat down with deliberate calm. His thumb brushed the edge of his phone, where a message blinked unseen. Everything ready. Just give the word. The hum of the aircraft filled the silence, but underneath it, something else was building. Tension, unspoken and undeniable, and Christopher Hale knew this was only the beginning. Christopher Hale adjusted himself into seat 2A, the leather cool against his back. He had chosen the window deliberately, not for the view, but for the small measure of distance it created from the rest of the world. Yet distance, on this morning, seemed impossible. Rachel Collins lingered at the aisle longer than necessary, the boarding pass still in her hand. Her eyes scanned the name, her lips pursing. "Mr. Hale," she said finally, voice polite but clipped. "I'll need to confirm this with the manifest. Please remain seated." Christopher gave a slight nod. "Take your time." His words were calm, but his chest felt tight. He watched her step briskly toward the galley, handing the pass to David Miller, the lead flight attendant. Passengers continued filing in, the rhythm of stowing bags and finding seats masking the quiet scrutiny that had begun. Christopher felt eyes on him, quick glances from behind newspapers, from over phones, from the couple in 2C whispering to each other. He leaned back, gaze fixed on the oval window. The tarmac outside was alive with motion carts loaded with luggage, a fuel truck humming, ground staff in fluorescent vests waving signals. Life moved forward with purpose, but inside the cabin, time slowed. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Excuse me, sir." He turned. A man in his 40s, khakis and a golf jacket, leaned across the aisle. "Are you sure this is your seat, I mean? I just thought." His words trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. Christopher held his gaze steadily. "Yes, this is my seat." The man flushed, muttering, "Just asking." before turning back toward his tablet. It wasn't anger Christopher felt in that moment, but a familiar weariness. He thought of the thousands of small cuts over the years, moments when his presence alone was treated as a question mark. He pressed his palms together, a silent act of restraint. David Miller appeared at the front of the cabin, manifest in hand. His expression was firm, almost rehearsed. "Mr. Hale, I'm going to need you to step out of the cabin for a quick clarification." The words rippled through first class like a dropped stone. A woman in pearls raised her brows. The man in the golf jacket smirked. The couple in 2C leaned in closer to hear. Christopher unbuckled slowly, standing with the quiet dignity of someone who refused to be rushed. He followed David into the galley, where Rachel waited, arms crossed. David lowered his voice, though not enough to prevent nearby passengers from overhearing. "Sir, your name doesn't appear in our system for seat 2A. Christopher's brow lifted. "That's interesting, because I booked this flight 2 weeks ago, confirmed by email, app, and phone." "Would you like me to show you?" Rachel interjected sharply. "Sometimes mistakes happen, but until this is resolved, you can't remain in first class." Christopher's eyes flicked between them. His voice was soft, but carried steel. "So, let me understand. My boarding pass scanned. My ID was verified. But now you're telling me I don't exist in your system." Neither answered immediately. David shifted uncomfortably. Rachel's jaw remained tight. Christopher exhaled, slow and deliberate. He pulled his phone from his pocket, swiping to the airline's app. With practice motions, he brought up his itinerary Flight 382 First Class, Seat 2A. He turned the screen toward them. "Perhaps your system needs updating." David glanced, hesitation flashing across his face. Rachel, however, shook her head. This could still be a glitch or fraud. The word hung heavy. Fraud. A quiet insult cloaked in procedure. Christopher felt the weight of choice pressing on him. He could push back, raise his voice, demand justice here and now, or he could hold steady as stone until the truth revealed itself. His father's voice echoed again. "Don't let them decide your dignity. Son, that belongs to you." He tucked his phone away. "Then do what you need to do. I'll wait right here." David cleared his throat. "Security may need to verify." Christopher's eyes didn't waver. "Then call them." The moment stretched. Passengers craned their necks, sensing drama. A young woman near row 3 lifted her phone discreetly. Camera pointed toward the galley. Her name was Maria Johnson, though Christopher didn't know it yet. Minutes passed before 2 security officers arrived. One, Officer Daniel Brooks, tall and broad-shouldered, wore a look of practiced neutrality. The other, Officer Karen Lopez, had sharper eyes that darted between faces. David explained quickly, painting the picture of a possible seating error and identity issue. His tone suggested suspicion without evidence. Karen turned to Christopher. "Sir, may I see your ID and boarding pass again?" Christopher handed them over calmly. No tremor in his hands, no quiver in his voice. She studied them, then glanced at Daniel. The officer gave a small nod. "Looks valid to me." Karen pursed her lips. "Still, we'll need to contact the captain." Christopher inclined his head slightly. "Please do. Inside, though, something was shifting. He could feel the weight of every eye, every assumption, pressing on him like a tide. Yet beneath that weight lay a current of resolve. When Karen stepped toward the cockpit, Christopher's phone buzzed in his pocket. A single message lit the screen. "Need me to step in." He didn't reply yet. Timing mattered. David's voice, strained now, broke the silence. "Sir, if this doesn't check out, I'll have no choice but to ask you to deplane." Christopher looked at him, gaze steady, unwavering. "And if it does check out," David faltered, then you can take your seat." Christopher leaned in slightly, his voice low. "Remember those words." The cockpit door opened. Captain Richard Evans emerged, tall, uniform immaculate. His face was stern, as though carved from stone. Karen briefed him quickly, her words hushed but urgent. The captain turned his eyes on Christopher, studying him with a cold detachment. "Mr. Hale, until this is clarified, I can't allow you to remain in first class. Regulations require cooperation." Christopher felt the ripple of injustice crest higher, yet his tone stayed calm. "Captain, regulations also require evidence. I have presented mine. The error is not mine to fix." The standoff was sharp, electric. Maria Johnson's phone caught it all, her livestream quietly gaining viewers by the second. Then, the twist Christopher's phone buzzed again. This time, he swiped it open. A voice filled his ear, deep and steady. "Chris, it's Helen Morrison. I just got an alert. Do you need me to intervene?" Christopher's lips curved faintly. Helen Morrison, Skyline Air's executive vice president, his second in command. Few on this flight knew that the man they were questioning was not just a passenger, but the chairman and CEO of the very airline they worked for. He looked at the captain, at David, at Rachel. Then he spoke, voice measured, every syllable deliberate. 12 minutes, he said softly. That's how long this has taken. And in 12 minutes more, the course of this flight may change completely. The words hung heavy, weighted with a truth only he fully understood, and somewhere deep inside, Christopher Hale felt the tide turn. The galley was thick with silence, the kind of silence that feels like a room holding its breath. Captain Richard Evans stood squarely across from Christopher Hale, his arms folded, authority radiating from the polished stripes on his shoulders. Rachel Collins and David Miller lingered at his side, their posture stiff with the confidence of being backed by command. Christopher sat back down in seat 2A, his movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. His phone, resting on his thigh, still glowed faintly with Helen Morrison's message. The line was open. All he had to do was say yes. But he didn't, not yet. He let the silence work, let it stretch until even the hum of the aircraft seemed distant. Then he spoke, voice calm but resonant enough to cut through the air. "Captain Evans," he began, "you've stopped this boarding process over a ticket that has been validated 3 times. You've involved security, delayed passengers, and now stand here as if I'm the problem. I need to ask you, what exactly do you believe I've done?" The captain's lips pressed thin. "It isn't about belief. It's about procedure." Christopher tilted his head slightly. "Procedure without reason is suspicion in uniform." Rachel shifted uncomfortably, her eyes flicking toward the passengers. She could see the phones now more than one. Maria Johnson wasn't the only one recording. Whispers had started circulating through the cabin, fragments of words that carried weight. Why him? Did they even check the others? This doesn't look right. David Miller tried to reassert control. "Sir, until the system reflects your seat." "We cannot," Christopher cut him off gently. "Until the system reflects my seat, or until you believe I belong in it." The words landed sharp, and David blinked, caught off guard. Officer Daniel Brooks, who had been silent until now, stepped forward slightly. His voice was even, low. "Captain, I've checked the documents myself. They're valid. I see no grounds for removal. Karen Lopez, his partner, added carefully, if there's a system error, it's on your side, not his. The captain stiffened. Officers, I appreciate your input, but final authority rests with me. Christopher leaned back, folding his hands. His expression was serene, but his thoughts churned. He remembered another flight years ago, when he was just starting out in business, long before titles and power. A flight where he was pulled aside for random screening. The humiliation of his colleagues walking past, silent, pretending not to notice. The sting of that memory pressed against the present moment. But he wasn't that young man anymore. His phone buzzed again. This time, Christopher raised it to his ear, the faintest smile crossing his lips. He spoke calmly into the receiver, though his words were meant for every ear in the cabin. Helen, Patch in legal and operations. We may need to escalate. The effect was immediate. Rachel's eyes widened. David frowned, confusion breaking through his confidence. Even Captain Evans faltered. Helen Morrison's voice was steady, audible through the speaker. Understood. Chris. Legal is standing by. Do you want me to brief the board? Murmurs rippled through first class. Passengers glanced at one another, questions forming without answers. Who was this man? Why did his call carry such weight? Christopher's gaze never left the captain. Not yet. Helen. Let's give them a chance to do the right thing. The captain's jaw tightened. Sir, who exactly are you? Christopher held his stare. Then slowly, he reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small leather folio. From it, he slid out a card, heavy with embossed lettering. He placed it on the tray table in front of him. Captain Evans leaned in, eyes narrowing as he read. The blood drained from his face. Christopher Hale, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer, Skyline Air. The weight of the revelation landed like thunder. Rachel gasped quietly. David's posture wilted. Even the officers exchanged stunned glances. Christopher spoke softly, but his voice carried to every corner of the cabin. I am not just a passenger. I am the reason this airline exists in its current form. And for the past 12 minutes, I have been treated as if my presence here is a threat rather than a fact. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just silence and the sound of Maria Johnson's livestream audience climbing by the hundreds, then thousands. Christopher leaned forward slightly, voice dropping into something almost intimate. Captain Evans, I will not raise my voice. I will not cause a scene. But I will not allow this pattern to continue. Not on my airline. Not today. The captain swallowed hard. The lines of authority etched into his face, softening into something closer to fear. Mr. Hale, I didn't know. Christopher raised a hand. That's exactly the point. You didn't need to know. Dignity is not tied to titles. Respect is not conditional. Rachel's cheeks flushed red. David looked down at the floor. Officer Daniel Brooks straightened, his voice steady. Captain, with all due respect, the situation seems resolved. Mr. Hale's credentials are beyond valid. I suggest we proceed with boarding. Karen nodded. And for the record, I'd like to include my observation that Mr. Hale has been calm and cooperative throughout. The captain hesitated, but the tide had already turned. He gave a short nod. Very well. Christopher picked up the CEO card and slid it back into the folio. He turned to Helen's voice on the line. Helen, keep the board on standby. I'll brief them once we land. Understood. Chris, she replied, And Chris. Her voice softened. Proud of you. He ended the call, his face unreadable. As he settled back into seat 2A, the tension didn't dissolve so much as shift. Passengers now looked at him with a mix of awe, curiosity, and discomfort. Some smiled apologetically. Others avoided his gaze entirely. Maria Johnson kept her phone steady, whispering into the stream, "He's the CEO, the actual CEO." They tried to kick him out of his own seat. Christopher closed his eyes briefly, exhaling. He felt both the sting of the ordeal and the weight of responsibility pressing harder now. Because this wasn't just about him. It was about every passenger who didn't have a title to shield them. Every story that ended differently because no one was watching. And deep down, he knew this was no longer just a flight. It was the beginning of something larger, something that would ripple far beyond the walls of this aircraft. The plane was still parked at the gate, but inside the first-class cabin, time felt suspended. Passengers sat frozen, as if the revelation of Christopher Hale's identity had shifted gravity itself. Maria Johnson's phone trembled slightly in her hand as she whispered into her live stream. He's the CEO, the actual CEO of Skyline Air. They doubted him. They tried to remove him. And look at him now, calm, collected, not raising his voice. Her comments section exploded. Messages flew in unbelievable. This is America in 2025. Tagging every news outlet. Stay live. Maria, don't stop streaming. Rachel Collins retreated to the galley, cheek still burning. She could feel shame gnawing at her, though pride pushed back. How was I supposed to know, she thought. Yet deep inside, she knew the truth. She hadn't asked the same questions of the white man in the golf jacket. She hadn't stopped the pearl-wearing woman. She had singled out Christopher, and she couldn't escape it now. David Miller sank into his jump seat momentarily, heart pounding. Years of procedure, years of thinking he was simply following rules, collapsed in his mind. He wondered if this video, this moment, would end his career. At the cockpit door, Captain Richard Evans gripped the handle, staring ahead. For a man who had prided himself on control, the past 20 minutes had ripped it away. He had acted with suspicion, not evidence. He had spoken with authority, but not fairness. And now, authority was slipping through his fingers. Christopher, meanwhile, sat motionless in seat 2A, his briefcase beside him, hands folded loosely on his lap. His heartbeat had steadied, his breathing slow, deliberate, but beneath his calm exterior, thoughts surged like an undercurrent. He thought of his mother, who had worked 2 jobs so he could attend the schools that opened doors. He thought of his father's endless lessons on dignity. He thought of every young man and woman who would never get the chance to defend themselves in a moment like this, who would be escorted out, silenced, humiliated, forgotten. And he decided he would not let this pass quietly. He reached for his phone, opening a secure channel used only by senior executives. His thumb hovered over the mic before he spoke quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for Maria's camera to catch. Activate internal review. Document everything from this flight. The message was sent, encrypted, received instantly at Skyline headquarters, back in the terminal. Helen Morrison sat in her office overlooking the runway, a Bluetooth earpiece glowing blue. Around her, assistants and analysts were already in motion. The live stream had reached them, flagged by the company's media monitoring software. Helen's face remained calm, but her pulse raced. Patch this into comms. She ordered, "Get legal on standby, and someone draft a holding statement. If this goes viral, and it will, we need to be ready." She glanced at the screen again. The counter on Maria's live stream had jumped past 50,000 viewers. On board. Murmurs turned into open conversations. A passenger in row 4 whispered, "I can't believe they treated him like that." Another muttered, "If that's how they treat their own CEO, imagine the rest of us." Christopher opened his eyes slowly, gaze steady. He addressed the cabin in a low, even tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. But sometimes delays are necessary when truth takes the longer road." The words struck chords. Some nodded silently. Others looked down, ashamed of their earlier assumptions. Captain Evans reemerged, voice tight. "Mr. Hale, we're ready to depart. Will you be remaining on this flight?" Christopher's response was quiet, but unshakable. "Yes, Captain, I will remain, but you will not be in command." The air shifted instantly. Rachel gasped softly. David froze. The passengers held their breath. The captain's face turned crimson. "Excuse me." Christopher's hand moved calmly to his phone. He tapped a button, and within seconds, Helen Morrison's voice filled the cabin through the speaker. "Captain Evans," she said firmly, "this is Helen Morrison, Executive Vice President. Effective immediately. You are relieved of command pending review. Please return to the terminal." The silence that followed was seismic. Passengers stared, wide-eyed, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Evans' jaw worked, but no words came. His authority, once unshakable, had been dismantled in front of crew, passengers, and tens of thousands of viewers online. Slowly, stiffly. He turned and walked toward the door. Christopher exhaled quietly, then looked at the stunned faces around him. His voice was measured, almost gentle. "This isn't about humiliation. It's about accountability, and accountability must start at the top." Rachel lowered her eyes, tears threatening. David rubbed his temple, his chest tight. Maria Johnson whispered into her stream, voice thick with emotion. "He's not just defending himself. He's changing the system in real time." Minutes later, the replacement captain, Jennifer Walsh, a woman in her 40s with steady eyes and a reputation for fairness, entered the cabin. She approached Christopher first. "Mr. Hale," she said quietly, "I'll take it from here. My crew and I will make sure this flight continues with dignity." Christopher inclined his head. "Thank you, Captain Walsh." As boarding resumed, Rachel and David returned to their duties, subdued, shaken. Officer Brooks gave Christopher a respectful nod before exiting. Officer Lopez lingered a moment, her gaze meeting Christopher's as if to say, "I saw, I know, and I'll remember." Once the doors closed and the plane began to taxi, Christopher leaned back, his eyes heavy. His phone buzzed again, texts from colleagues, friends, even political leaders who had already seen the video. The world outside was moving fast, but inside the cabin, he allowed himself one quiet breath. Maria Johnson's stream ticked past 200,000 live viewers. Comments poured in. "This man's calm is unreal. Systemic change starts here. I'll never forget this flight." And though Christopher said nothing, deep in his heart he knew these 12 minutes, captured forever, would ripple far beyond this aircraft. They would spark conversations in boardrooms, in homes, in classrooms. They would test loyalties, demand reforms, stir the conscience of a nation. But for now, as the plane lifted into the sky, Christopher closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Let this mean something." The engines roared to life as Flight 382 pulled away from the gate, the vibrations humming through the cabin walls. Yet inside, the air was unusually quiet. First-class passengers sat stiff, aware they had just witnessed something extraordinary, though not all fully understood it. Christopher Hale rested his head lightly against the window, eyes half closed, but his mind was far from rest. Beneath his steady breathing lay a storm of thoughts. How many others were forced off planes, dismissed without question? How many lacked a camera, a voice, a position to shield them, and how many stories had vanished into silence? He opened his eyes, watching the lights of Liberty International fall away beneath the climbing aircraft. He felt the irony, a black man at the helm of one of America's largest airlines, still asked to prove he belonged in a seat he had paid for. Across the aisle, Maria Johnson clutched her phone. Her livestream had passed 500,000 viewers before takeoff, the comments spilling faster than she could read. She leaned closer to the camera, whispering, "We're in the air now, but this isn't over. People need to see this. They need to know." Her voice shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of realization. She hadn't expected to become part of a national moment when she boarded this plane. Yet here she was, holding a window into injustice and resilience that the world was now demanding to watch. Rachel Collins busied herself in the galley, hands moving with mechanical precision. But inside, she was unraveling. She replayed every choice she'd made, every glance she'd cast. The memory of stopping Christopher, of doubting him without reason, pressed like a stone on her chest. For the first time in her career, she wondered not just about rules, but about fairness. David Miller sat beside her, head bowed. He whispered, "We're done. Rachel, you know that, right? Whatever future we thought we had here, it's gone." Rachel's throat tightened. She wanted to protest, to blame the system, the procedures, the captain, but the truth was clear. They had chosen suspicion, and the world had seen it in the cockpit. Captain Jennifer Walsh steadied her voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're climbing through 10,000 feet. Estimated flight time to New York is 2 hours. Sit back, relax, and we'll keep you updated along the way." Her tone was calm, reassuring, but her eyes told a different story. She had inherited a shaken crew, a divided cabin, and a passenger who was not just a passenger, but her ultimate employer. Responsibility weighed heavier than altitude. Christopher unfolded the tray table, pulling out a small leather-bound notebook. He opened to a blank page and began writing not notes, not orders, but thoughts. Words poured quietly, each letter deliberate. Dignity cannot be negotiated. Respect must not depend on recognition. And change requires more than exposure. It demands structure. He paused, the pen hovering. His reflection in the darkening window looked back at him. Tired eyes, strong jaw. A man carrying both privilege and scars. He thought of his late wife, who used to remind him after long days, "Chris, the higher you climb, the more the winds will test you. Hold steady." Her voice echoed now, steadying him. The cabin lights dimmed. Passengers whispered cautiously, aware that every sound felt amplified in the tension. Some exchanged sympathetic nods toward Christopher. Others avoided his gaze entirely, too ashamed to acknowledge their earlier silence. Maria lifted her phone again, addressing her swelling audience. "You saw it. The doubt, the confrontation, the reveal. And yet look at him now. Calm, writing in a notebook as if the world isn't watching. But the truth is, the world is watching. Over 1 million of you." The number kept climbing. News outlets were clipping her feed. Influencers were reposting. Civil rights leaders were tagging lawmakers. What had begun as a quiet act of bias was now a national reckoning in real time. Christopher glanced toward Maria. Their eyes met briefly. He gave her a small nod, not of approval, but of recognition, as if to say, "Keep telling it. Don't stop now." She nodded back, whispering, "I won't." Rachel approached cautiously with a tray of water, her steps hesitant. She placed the glass on Christopher's table, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry, Mr. Hale." He looked at her, his gaze neither harsh nor forgiving, but searching. After a pause, he spoke quietly. "Rachel, the apology isn't mine to keep. It belongs to everyone who has ever sat in this seat and been doubted. Do you understand?" Tears pricked her eyes. She nodded, retreating before emotion overcame her. David lingered a few rows back, gripping the seat. He wanted to speak, but no words came. He knew that silence had been his sin from the beginning. As the plane leveled, turbulence rippled faintly, rattling trays and hearts alike. Christopher closed his notebook and slipped it back into the briefcase. His phone buzzed again, dozens of missed calls, messages from leaders, allies, journalists. He ignored them all. This wasn't the time for statements. This was the time for stillness. He turned to the window, watching the endless dark stretch across the sky. He thought of history, of every movement that began with one spark, one camera, one refusal to move. He thought of how his own life had been marked by moments like this, each one layering into the man he had become. A passenger 2 rows behind leaned forward, voice soft. "Mr. Hale, thank you for staying calm, for showing us." Christopher inclined his head, accepting the words without fanfare. Maria's stream captured it all, her commentary weaving around the quiet moments. This isn't just about a seat. It's about dignity. It's about how quickly judgment falls and how powerful calm can be. I've never seen anything like this. The comments scrolled faster, history in motion. I'm crying watching this. He's teaching us without preaching. Christopher closed his eyes again, this time not from weariness, but from choice. He let the hum of the engines fill the silence inside him. Let the steady rhythm remind him that even in turbulence, planes held course. And as Flight 382 carried its passengers through the night sky, Christopher Hale carried something heavier, the weight of a nation's eyes, the burden of history, and the hope that 12 minutes of injustice could become a lifetime of change. At 30,000 feet, Flight 382 hummed steadily through the dark night sky. To most, it was another cross-country flight. But inside the glowing rectangle of Maria Johnson's phone, millions of people were witnessing something entirely different. Her livestream had crossed 3 million viewers by the time the plane reached cruising altitude. News anchors were quoting her feed. Hashtags flooded social platforms, was grounded in dignity and dual minutes that shook the sky. Civil rights leaders, celebrities, politicians. Their comments poured in as if the world had collectively paused to watch one man's quiet resistance. Maria, half in disbelief, whispered to her camera, "I thought I was just recording an argument. But this is history unfolding in real time, in first class." Christopher Hale sat with his briefcase at his feet, hands folded, posture calm. Yet beneath that calm ran currents of thought sharp enough to cut steel. He had faced hostile investors, congressional hearings, even hostile takeovers. But nothing had left him feeling as raw as those 12 minutes at the cabin door. They doubted me before they even saw my name. They doubted me because of skin, not status. And if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. He glanced at Maria. She was still broadcasting, her words careful but impassioned. For the first time since the confrontation, Christopher felt gratitude stir, not for her sympathy, but for her courage. She hadn't looked away. She had pointed her camera straight into the discomfort and said, "This is wrong." Back on the ground, in Skyline Air's Atlanta headquarters, the crisis war room had sprung to life. Helen Morrison, executive vice president, stood before a wall of screens, each one replaying angles of Maria's live stream. The corporate media team was already on damage control calls, but Helen knew the truth. No spin could erase what millions had seen. "Get me Christopher Hale on secure comms," she ordered. "He's airborne." "Ma'am," an aide replied nervously. "No sat link established yet. He hasn't responded to messages." Helen pinched the bridge of her nose. "Then we sit tight. But the moment that plane lands, everything changes." Reporters swarmed the headquarters entrance, their microphones angled like weapons. "Go." Questions ricocheted. "Is it true your CEO was discriminated against by his own staff?" "What does this mean for Skyline's commitment to diversity?" "Will Captain Evans face federal investigation?" Helen avoided the cameras. She had no answers yet. On board. The tension in the galley thickened. Rachel Collins poured coffee mechanically, though her hands shook. David Miller leaned against the service wall, eyes closed, every muscle in his face heavy with regret. He finally muttered, "We're not just losing our jobs. Rachel, we're losing our names. No airline will ever touch us again." Rachel swallowed hard. "I didn't think. I just assumed." Her voice cracked. "And now the whole world knows." Christopher overheard fragments, though he didn't turn. He was not interested in their excuses. Not tonight. His focus was broader, not on punishment, but on prevention. He took out his notebook again. Writing in careful strokes, policy alone cannot protect dignity. Training cannot erase prejudice. But accountability forces change. His pen pressed deeper into the paper. And if the world is watching, then we must not waste the moment. Maria's voice broke his focus. She had turned her phone slightly, pointing at Christopher. "He's been calm the whole time. Look at him. Not shouting, not threatening, just being, and somehow, that's the loudest message of all." The comments exploded. "That calm is power. He's teaching us patience under fire. I want to be like him when life tests me." Christopher looked up. Their eyes met again, and though he said nothing, his gaze seemed to tell her, "Don't turn me into a saint. Just keep showing the truth." In the cockpit, Captain Jennifer Walsh kept her hands steady on the controls, but her thoughts raced. She had taken command in the middle of a cultural earthquake. "Control. This is Flight 382. Smooth ride at 32,000. On course for LaGuardia," she reported. Her voice was even, but her heart pounded. She knew history books would mark this flight, and she would be a footnote in its margins. Meanwhile, at a Midtown Manhattan newsroom, producers barked orders. "Get every angle of that live stream cut in civil rights analysts. This is the story tonight. Forget the election poll numbers. This is bigger." Christopher's phone buzzed again, this time with an encrypted alert. His assistant had patched in a secure message: "Congressional leaders request statement upon landing. Media outlets demanding comment. Stocks down 3% after hours." He exhaled slowly. Power had always come with pressure. But this was different. This wasn't about shareholders or profits. This was about people, passengers who looked like him, who lived without the insulation of a CEO's title. He thought back to his childhood, standing beside his mother at a bus stop in Montgomery, Alabama, when the driver had closed the doors on them because the bus was full, though empty seats lined the back. He remembered her hand tightening on his, her whisper, One day, Chris, you'll have the power to make them see us. Don't waste it." That whisper echoed now, 30,000 feet above the ground. The cabin shifted as turbulence rattled glasses. Passengers gasped, a reminder of how fragile the ride could feel. Christopher remained still, eyes forward, mind sharper than the shaking fuselage. Maria steadied her phone. "We hit a bump, but don't worry," she told her audience. "We're still here, and so is the story." When the turbulence eased, Christopher finally rose. The cabin hushed as he stood, his presence commanding without effort. He walked slowly to the galley, where Rachel and David froze. His voice was quiet, but every syllable carried. "You thought you were protecting standards, but what you protected was prejudice. And now the whole world has seen it. What will you do with that truth?" Neither answered. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes. David's lips trembled, but no words came. Christopher nodded slightly, as if acknowledging their silence as its own answer, then turned back to his seat. The gesture wasn't cruel, it was final, Maria whispered into her phone. "You can feel it in here. It's like the plane itself knows something shifted. The air feels heavier." And she was right. Even the hum of the engines seemed changed, carrying not just passengers but a storm of accountability, fear, and hope. As Christopher sat again, he thought of the landing ahead. Reporters, cameras, statements. He disliked theatrics, but he knew the truth. Sometimes theater was what moved nations. His pen touched paper once more. "When we land, it cannot be about me. It must be about every person who has ever been doubted, diminished, dismissed. If I make this personal, it dies in a headline. If I make it collective, it lives as a movement." He closed the notebook, tucking it away. The plane soared eastward through the night, but the real turbulence awaited on the ground, and Christopher Hale, calm as ever, prepared himself not to defend his dignity, but to transform it into a shield for others. The descent into New York felt longer than usual. The lights of the city stretched beneath the wings like constellations pulled down to earth. Passengers craned to see through their windows, each of them aware they were arriving not just at LaGuardia, but at the center of a storm. Christopher Hale closed his eyes as the landing gear thudded into place. He had been in countless boardrooms, met presidents, and spoken at summits across the world. Yet the gravity in his chest now felt heavier than any negotiation table. When those doors open, the real turbulence begins, he thought. Maria Johnson kept her phone steady, whispering updates to her millions of viewers. "We're landing now. The captain just announced final approach. Everyone's tense. Nobody knows what's waiting outside." Her comments flooded with messages. "We're with you. Tell him we believe in him. History at the gate." The wheels screeched as rubber met asphalt. A collective breath released. The plane slowed, then taxied toward the gate. But instead of the usual bustle, passengers saw flashing lights through the windows, police vehicles, news vans, and a line of cameras glittering like stars behind the glass. Rachel Collins clutched the galley counter, whispering, "Oh my God, they're here for us." David Miller sat stone still, his career unraveling in front of him before the seatbelt sign even switched off. Captain Jennifer Walsh's voice came over the intercom, calm but deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. We ask that you remain seated. Security and federal authorities will be boarding shortly." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others pulled out their phones. The world outside was waiting, and they were sitting inside the story. Christopher straightened his tie, not for appearance, but for ritual. His father had always told him, "Look sharp when they look down on you. It unsettles them more than anger ever could." When the door opened, uniformed federal security stepped in first. Behind them came Helen Morrison, her heels clicking firmly against the jet bridge floor. She looked weary but resolute. Spotting Christopher, she gave the faintest nod. "Mr. Hale," she said, voice low, "we need to deplane you first. The media is swarming. Congress is calling. The DOT and FAA are both demanding statements." Christopher stood, his briefcase in hand. His gaze moved once more to Rachel and David, still frozen in their seats. He paused, then spoke softly enough for the first rows to hear, "Every decision has consequences. Tonight, you see yours." He walked down the aisle. The plane was silent, passengers' eyes following him like witnesses in a courtroom. Some nodded in respect, some simply stared, but all felt the weight of what had transpired. As Christopher stepped onto the jet bridge, the roar hit him. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, voices clashed in a chaotic chorus. "Mr. Hale, were you denied your seat because of your race? Will heads roll at Skyline Air? Do you plan to resign as CEO after this embarrassment? What message do you have for Americans watching?" Christopher didn't flinch. He raised his hand not in anger, but in quiet command. The crowd hushed, as if compelled. His voice carried steady and deliberate. 12 minutes. That's how long it took for dignity to be questioned, for prejudice to override protocol, for calm to be tested against chaos. 12 minutes that millions of people have now witnessed. But this is not about me. This is about every traveler who has ever been told they don't belong, who has ever been doubted because of how they look, before a word was even spoken. The cameras crackled. Reporters scribbled furiously. Helen, watching from behind, felt a shiver. He wasn't just addressing the press. He was addressing history. "I did not ground this plane because of pride." Christopher continued, "I grounded it because dignity cannot be delayed until landing. Safety is not just about engines and wings. It is about how people are treated in their seats. Tonight, the world saw what happens when that truth is forgotten." Questions flew again, but he raised his hand once more. "There will be time for details. There will be accountability. But hear me, clearly change is not optional. Not here, not now, not ever again." The crowd erupted. Some applauded, others shouted more questions, but Christopher walked past them with measured steps, escorted by federal security toward a waiting car. Maria, still streaming, whispered, "You just saw it." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw insults. He just spoke truth, and it landed harder than any shout could. Inside the car, Helen sat beside him, her tablet buzzing with updates. "Congress wants you in D.C. tomorrow. Shareholders are demanding an emergency call. Our legal team says the FAA is preparing formal inquiries." Christopher leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. "Good. Let them all come. This moment isn't just a crisis. It's a mirror. We'll hold it up until everyone sees." The motorcade pulled away from LaGuardia, lights slicing through the night, reporters chased, cameras rolling. In the quiet of the car, Christopher's phone buzzed again, a message from his daughter. "Maya, I watched it all. I'm proud of you. Dad, you taught me that calm is stronger than rage. Tonight, the world learned it too." His chest tightened, not from pain, but from the swell of something deeper purpose. For the first time that night, Christopher allowed himself a faint smile. He whispered, almost to himself, It's only beginning. The sun had barely risen over Washington, D.C., but the Capitol dome already glowed in sharp relief against the pale sky. The day promised no ordinary session. Inside, staffers rushed with folders and phones pressed to their ears. Cameras lined up along marble hallways, and whispers swirled about one name, Christopher Hale. In the black sedan, moving up Constitution Avenue, Christopher sat in silence. His suit was pressed, his tie straight, yet his mind wrestled with quiet storms. He replayed the 12 minutes in his head, the doubt at the gate, the scrutiny in the cabin, the decision to halt the flight. He had not shouted, he had not stormed, but the consequences now stretched across the nation. Helen Morrison, seated beside him, reviewed notes on her tablet. "Congress has called this an emergency hearing," she said. "Oversight committees, transportation leaders, even a few senators who never show up to aviation hearings. You'll be under oath. But it's not about perjury. It's about perception. They want to see if you break." Christopher gave a faint smile. "They'll be waiting a long time." At the Capitol steps, the swarm hit. Reporters pressed forward, microphones flaring like bayonets. "Mr. Hale, are you resigning today? Will Skyline face federal fines? Do you believe racism is systemic in your airline?" Christopher stopped briefly. Today is not about Skyline alone. Today is about accountability in an industry where dignity should never be optional. Let's get to it. Inside the chamber, the hearing room buzzed with anticipation. Rows of press filled the back, while senators and representatives shuffled papers at the front dais. Behind Christopher sat Helen, Maria Johnson invited as a witness due to her viral live stream and a small legal team. The chairman's gavel struck. "This committee convenes today to address the incident aboard Skyline Air Flight 382. Mr. Christopher Hale, you are under oath." Christopher raised his right hand, swore the oath, and settled into his seat. Cameras zoomed in, broadcasting his calm face across the country. The first senator leaned forward. "Mr. Hale, did you personally order the grounding of Flight 382? "Yes," Christopher answered, "because safety and dignity were compromised." Safety, the senator pressed. There was no mechanical issue, no external threat. Why stop a plane? Christopher's voice carried steady, deliberate cadence, because a cabin is more than metal and fuel. It is people. When crew members show prejudice, they compromise authority. When passengers are humiliated, they lose trust. And when trust collapses at 30,000 feet, safety follows. I grounded that plane to prevent escalation in the air. 12 minutes on the ground avoided hours of chaos in the sky. A murmur moved through the room. Even skeptical lawmakers shifted in their seats. Another representative chimed in. "Are you saying racial bias endangers aviation safety?" "I am saying," Christopher replied, his eyes steady, "that racial bias endangers everything it touches. Safety, trust, humanity itself. And if airlines don't treat passengers with equal dignity, then no seatbelt, no checklist, no regulation can keep us safe." Maria Johnson wiped her eyes silently. Her live stream had captured the injustice, but hearing it framed as a matter of national safety gave it new weight. A senator from Texas leaned in sharply. "Mr. Hale, critics argue you staged this, that you grounded the plane to create a spectacle." Christopher's jaw tightened. "Senator, if dignity has become a spectacle, that says more about the system than about me. I did not stage bias. It was served to me unasked. I chose only to confront it in real time. The room fell quiet. For a moment, the senator looked as though he had been struck. Helen glanced at Christopher, reading his calm restraint as the most powerful weapon in the room. After hours of questioning, the chairman leaned forward. "Mr. Hale, what do you believe should happen next?" Christopher clasped his hands together. "Airlines must treat dignity as a standard, not a courtesy. I propose 3 measures mandatory bias training certified by independent bodies, a passenger dignity bill of rights, and a federal oversight mechanism that allows travelers to report discrimination in real time. Change cannot be left to memos. It must be built into the system." Reporters scribbled feverishly. Hashtags began forming online. When the gavel finally struck again, signaling adjournment, Christopher stood with unbroken composure. Outside, cameras erupted once more. Maria was asked how she felt after watching the testimony. Her voice trembled. "He spoke what we all feel, but never get to say. That respect isn't luxury, it's survival." That night, Christopher sat in his hotel suite, looking out over the city. The lights blinked in the distance like restless stars. Helen entered with updates. "Stock's down 12% today," she said. "But public support is soaring. Petitions are trending. People are demanding reforms industry-wide." Christopher nodded slowly. He loosened his tie, sighing. "The market measures profit. The people measure pain. Right now, the pain is heavier than profit. That balance must change." His phone buzzed. Another message from his daughter. "Maya, I watched every word. You looked strong, Dad. But I know it hurts too. Don't carry it alone." For the first time that day, his eyes softened. He whispered, almost as a prayer, "One day, you won't have to." Outside, a crowd had gathered with candles, chanting, "Fly with dignity." Their voices rose against the night, not as protest alone, but as promise. Christopher stood at the window, watching. In their faces, he saw strangers who somehow felt like kin, bound not by blood, but by belief. And he realized that those 12 minutes had grown into something larger than him, larger than Skyline, larger than the skies themselves. It was no longer a single man's reckoning. It was a nation's. The boardroom at Skyline's Manhattan headquarters had seen its share of crises, fuel price spikes, labor disputes, even the aftermath of 9/11. But never had its walls contained a storm like this. Through the tall windows, the skyline of New York glittered, a cruel reminder of the name they bore. Inside, tension pressed like an unspoken verdict. Around the mahogany table sat 12 board members, investors, and senior executives, their faces a blend of calculation, fatigue, and quiet panic. Christopher Hale entered without ceremony. His navy suit was the same one he'd worn through the hearings. He had chosen not to change. A statement in itself. Helen Morrison followed, tablet in hand, her eyes sharp but cautious. "Mr. Hale," began Margaret Foster. "The CFO." Her tone clipped. "Before we begin, our stock has lost 18% in 48 hours. Credit agencies are threatening downgrades. Investors want immediate assurances. They want to know you have this under control." Christopher placed his briefcase on the table, but didn't sit. His eyes swept the room slowly, deliberately. "Do you believe?" "I don't." Silence. No one dared to answer. Finally, Robert Chen, the board chair, cleared his throat. "Christopher, this has escalated far beyond a single flight. We've got the FAA breathing down our necks, Congress demanding reforms, and now passengers calling for boycotts. Some shareholders are floating. Leadership changes." The words hung heavy in the air. Leadership changes. A polite way to say, your head on the block. Christopher smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed hard. You want to remove me for exposing the disease instead of curing it? He let the silence breathe. Be careful. Replace the surgeon mid-surgery, and the patient dies on the table. Helen's gaze flicked across the room, watching how the words unsettled them. Margaret pressed again. Christopher, with respect, passion doesn't stabilize markets. Numbers do. What's your plan? Christopher finally sat, clasping his hands. The market is already reacting, not just to the incident, but to what it represents distrust. If we want numbers to rise, we must rebuild trust. That means radical transparency, immediate accountability, and systemic reform. Define reform, Chen said carefully. Christopher's voice sharpened. Every employee, from CEO to cabin crew, undergoes certified bias and dignity training within 60 days. A new passenger Bill of Rights, enforceable and public. Independent oversight, a third-party ombudsman empowered to investigate discrimination in real time, and effective immediately. Bonuses for executives will be tied not just to profits, but to measurable progress in equity and customer dignity scores. Gas fluttered. Margaret almost dropped her pen. You'd tie executive pay to social metrics. Christopher leaned forward. No, I'd tie it to survival. Do you think we can outlast this storm by hiding behind quarterly margins? The public is watching. Regulators are circling. Congress is drafting bills because we failed to act. We either lead the change or get buried by it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then James Peterson, a longtime investor with silver hair and sharp eyes, said, And what if the shareholders refuse? What if they want profit over principles? Christopher's tone softened, almost mournful. Then they should invest elsewhere. Skyline's name cannot be worth billions, while its dignity is worth nothing. The words struck like stone. Even Robert Chen looked away, shifting uncomfortably. Helen stepped in. We've run the numbers. Public trust is our greatest currency. Lose it, and no buyback or merger saves us. Gain it, and we rise stronger than before. We can't trade in half measures anymore. The board murmured, some nodding reluctantly, others frowning deeply. Finally, Chen leaned forward. Christopher, this is bold. Too bold for some, but you have the floor. What's your immediate step? Christopher stood again. He pressed a button on the tablet Helen slid across. The screen behind them lit up with a new phrase. The Dignity Defense Fund. $50 million. Tonight, Christopher said, his voice resonant. I'm announcing the creation of a fund dedicated to protecting passenger rights, training staff, and ensuring accountability. $50 million seeded directly from executive compensation and board stipends, not PR, not charity, justice. The room erupted. Margaret protested. That's insane. You'll bankrupt us in goodwill. Christopher cut her off, calm but firm. No, we'll bankrupt ourselves in silence if we do nothing. $50 million is a lifeline. The public will see we're serious. The regulators will see we're proactive. And passengers will finally see that their dignity is worth more to us than a press release. Robert Chen rubbed his temples, then finally nodded. If you can get shareholder approval, I'll back it. Christopher locked eyes with him. I don't need their approval. I'm committing my own compensation and half my equity dividends for the next 2 years. If any of you care to join me, the fund doubles tonight. The shock was palpable. One by one, eyes darted around the table. Some executives looked ashamed, others inspired. Slowly, James Peterson raised his hand. "Count me in. Half my dividends as well." A ripple followed, one after another. Board members offered percentages, reluctant but compelled. Even Margaret, red-faced, finally muttered, 10% from me. Helen caught Christopher's eye, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself a real smile. When the meeting adjourned, the air felt different, still heavy, but shifted as though the storm had cracked open a sliver of light. "Alone in the hallway," Helen whispered, "you just gambled your fortune." Christopher adjusted his cufflinks. What's the use of fortune if it doesn't buy freedom? Not just for me, but for everyone who steps on one of our planes. He looked out at the city through the glass. Below, protesters held signs that read, "Fly with dignity and justice takes flight." Their chants drifted up faint but resolute. Christopher felt the weight lift slightly. For once, the tide was moving with him, not against him. Yet he knew the hardest flight was still ahead. 2 weeks later, the Grand Hall of the National Aviation Diversity Summit was filled with a kind of electricity that couldn't be faked. Executives, lawmakers, pilots, flight attendants, journalists, and ordinary travelers all gathered under the high ceilings and warm lights. On the stage, a banner stretched wide across the room, "Dignity is non-negotiable." Christopher Hale sat quietly at the side of the stage, waiting to be introduced. His mind wandered, not to numbers or market reports, but to memories his father teaching him how to hold his head high in a world that tried to lower it. His daughter Maya's text messages during the storm, the murmurs of passengers doubting his right to sit in 2A. 12 minutes of humiliation had become weeks of reckoning. Now came the test of whether it would lead to something greater. The moderator stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Christopher Hale, Chairman and CEO of Skyline Air." The applause was immediate, rolling like thunder through the hall. Some clapped politely, others stood on their feet, but the energy was undeniable. Christopher rose, buttoned his jacket, and walked with measured steps to the podium. He began without notes. 2 weeks ago, I was denied my seat, not by the system, but by people in the system. What followed was 12 minutes of suspicion, humiliation, and choices. Many of you saw the footage. Some of you lived it. But what matters now is not what happened then, but what we decide to do with it. His voice was calm, but the pauses he left gave his words weight. I am not the first person to face bias at 30,000 feet, and sadly, I will not be the last. But those 12 minutes forced open a door we cannot close. A door to ask who belongs here, who is trusted, who is doubted before they even speak. He scanned the room, letting the questions sink in. This is bigger than one airline. It is bigger than me. This is about whether dignity is treated as a privilege or a right. I say it is a right, and rights must be defended, not requested. The hall erupted in applause. Maria Johnson, seated near the front, wiped her eyes again. Her livestream had been the spark, but this moment felt like the flame. Christopher raised a hand gently to quiet the crowd. That is why Skyline has launched the Dignity Defense Fund, $50 million and growing, dedicated to training, oversight, and real accountability. This fund is not charity. It is investment. Investment in people. Investment in trust. Investment in the belief that no passenger, no employee, no human being should ever be told, "You don't belong here." Margaret Foster, the CFO, sat 2 rows back. She had resisted fiercely at first, but even she felt a strange pride stir. James Peterson, the veteran investor, leaned forward, nodding with conviction. Robert Chen, the board chair, clapped until his palms reddened. Christopher continued, "We have tied executive pay to equity metrics. We have created an independent ombuds office for passenger dignity. We are inviting regulators to audit us, not because we are afraid, but because we welcome the light. And I challenge every airline, every corporation represented here today do the same. Not tomorrow, now." The words rang out, echoing beyond the hall. He paused, then let his tone soften. "But beyond policies and funds, this is about people. About a father who wants his children to travel without fear. About a grandmother who should not have to explain why her boarding pass is questioned. About a teenager whose first flight should be wonder, not shame." Christopher's eyes glistened, though his voice did not break. "I grounded a plane because dignity was grounded first. But tonight, I want us to lift it back into the air, higher than ever." Silence hung for a moment. Then the crowd rose, wave upon wave, until nearly everyone was standing. The applause was not polite this time. It was roaring, cathartic, alive. Maya Hale watched from the side, tears streaking her face. She whispered, "That's my dad." Afterward, as the crowd filtered out, journalists pressed for interviews, regulators huddled in serious discussions, and CEOs from rival airlines shook Christopher's hand, some out of respect, some out of necessity. Maria approached him quietly. "Mr. Hale, people are calling you the calm storm, the man who didn't need to shout to shake the system." Christopher smiled faintly. "Storms don't destroy by shouting. They destroy by moving steadily until nothing can stand in their way." Helen Morrison joined them, exhaustion and pride written on her face. "We just changed the industry. You know that." "Right." Christopher glanced at the banner above the stage. "Dignity is non-negotiable." He shook his head softly. "No. We just reminded it of something it should have never forgotten." Later that night, in the quiet of his hotel room, Christopher finally let himself exhale. He removed his jacket, loosened his tie, and stood by the window overlooking the city. The lights blinked far below, millions of lives moving, intersecting, colliding. His phone buzzed once more. A message from Maya. "Tonight you gave people hope. And me too." Christopher closed his eyes. For the first time since that flight, the ache in his chest eased. He whispered to the night, "Fly free, baby girl. That's all I want for you." Outside, the city pulsed with life. The storm that had begun with 12 minutes of humiliation had become something else entirely, a movement, a call, a flight forward. And Christopher Hale knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of a journey where every passenger, every voice, every soul could rise without fear, because dignity would finally, truly be cleared for takeoff. The story of Christopher Hale reminds us that dignity is not a luxury, and silence is not always safety. When he was denied his rightful seat, he chose restraint over rage, calm over chaos. In doing so, he revealed a truth many of us know. Prejudice often shows itself in ordinary places at gates, in lines, in whispers. For older audiences who have lived through decades of change, the lesson is both familiar and urgent. Change doesn't always come through loud speeches or quick anger. Sometimes it comes through steady courage, the refusal to shrink when the world tries to make you smaller. In our lives, we may not ground an airplane, but we can ground our values. We can pause before judging, speak when silence would wound, and teach younger generations that respect cannot wait until tomorrow. The deeper message is this system's only change when people insist that dignity must be part of the rules. And every time we choose to honor someone's humanity, no matter their race, age, or status, we help write a better future. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. If this story moved you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep these conversations alive and create a world where dignity is never denied.